1 year ago today, I quit my urban planning career without any real idea of what would come next. I'd always been obsessed with art, and I felt that I had enough skill to make it as a creative of some sort, whether that be as a writer, a visual artist, an interviewer, or most implausibly, as a music producer. I was a late bloomer in terms of my own creativity. It wasn't until COVID that I finally started to develop my creative potential. I was horrifically depressed and desperately in need of something to hyperfixate on, so I started teaching myself how to write. I deeply idolized the works of historians Robert Caro and Stephen Kinzer, whose works made history leap off the page while filling my mind with previously unimaginable possibilities. The written word did not come to me naturally. My words were dull, meandering, and lacking in any consistency of vision. I jumped between nonfiction historical examinations and manifesto-like anti-capitalist screeds. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to say. I was overflowing with emotions that I didn't understand. After months of creating worthless, self-important rambling, I found myself fixated on the history of Iran. I'd always been fascinated with the legacy of CIA interventions, and I felt that much of the world's current situation could be illuminated by examining the agency's 1953 coup, which overthrew the democratically elected government in favor of the pro-oil company Shah. I spent multiple hours each day digging into this subject, learning how to form sentences and structure ideas, but more than anything else, I was learning discipline and self-respect. As the youngest of four, I always felt like the black sheep of the family. I was subject to constant abuse from one of my brothers and developed an intense feeling of self-hatred, which persists through to today. But despite how I felt about myself, I found that I loved the words I'd written. I could look at them and say, hey, I did that. Nobody can take that away from me. And although I never finished my history of Iran, I got to showcase my writing skills in a Teen Vogue article which I penned on the history of the American eugenics movement and the deeply misunderstood woman at the center of its legal precedent. That piece remains one of my proudest accomplishments in life. Despite my success, I felt I'd achieved all I could hope for. The process of writing and editing a nationally published article, while incredibly rewarding, was emotionally draining and required an intensity of focus unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It didn't seem like something I could sustain, and I didn't believe in myself enough to continue. The very day after my article was published in Teen Vogue, I began my urban planning degree. It felt like the safe, reliable path, an in-demand career where I could help people and better my community while working in government. It might not have been my dream, but I thought I could at least be happy. I had my fun, now it was time to get serious. During college, I was plagued with depressive episodes, the most severe of which landed me in the hospital during one particularly stressful finals week. I felt as though I was living a double life. I clearly had some amount of talent, but I was too shy to tell anyone about my work or to even act like myself. I was terrified that I'd be rejected if I opened up to anyone, so I hid inside myself and pretended to be someone who I thought was more likable. I was desperate for some sort of creative outlet. By a stroke of luck, my advisor Matt was incredibly understanding and allowed me to take design classes as electives for my planning degree. I learned Photoshop and InDesign, met aspiring artists, and most crucially, I was introduced to zines, which are independent, hyper-specific printed works, by my professor Sam Mills. Under his guidance, I created the first visual art I was proud of, an Uncut Gems fanzine. At quarter's end, he encouraged me to continue making zines. He spoke highly of my voice and the uniqueness of my work. It was the first time I allowed myself to accept a compliment on anything visually creative. I decided to create something for the 2023 Spokane Zine Fest. The resulting semi-autobiographical art book, Confession of a Nobody, changed my life. It was heavily inspired by the Nine Inch Nails album The Downward Spiral, not just in terms of its dire content, but its underlying message about the unbreakable need for sincerity in art. I've obsessively consumed interviews since I was a sophomore in high school, and in 2023 I found myself particularly fascinated with those of Trent Reznor. The music he created was absolutely batshit insane. I couldn't even begin to fathom where it came from, how it was popular, or how a human being made it. Every cell in my body screamed at me to chase that feeling. The zine sold one copy, and its contents prompted my mother to ask me if I was going to kill someone, so I guess I succeeded. Despite the lack of a positive reaction or an economic incentive, I had been completely enamored with the process of making zines. I could do anything I wanted, could say whatever was on my mind. If there was an image in my head, I could figure out how to make it real. My lifetime of depression and hopelessness finally felt valid, even if only within the bounds of 20 full-color pages. Sure, my mom might think I was a homicidal maniac and I'd lose a shitload of money on printing costs, but fuck it. I thought my shit ruled. I'd put my name on something I dedicated my entire heart and soul to, and nobody could ever take that pride from me. 1 year later, I was out of college. I had a full-time planning career, and my obsession with Nine Inch Nails had grown even more profound. Each night I slaved away, hyper-focusing on my next project, the Nine Inch Nails fanzine Spiral With Me. Turned on by my overwhelming desire to visualize the downward spiral's insanity, my digital art skills increased exponentially. I pioneered a range of experimental techniques and agonized over every single minute detail, portions of my process which remain in place for every creative work I pursue. Spiral With Me also introduced me to the greatest love of my life, interviews. I was sitting in my cubicle one day when I got the email. Russell Mills, my personal hero and the man who created the Downward Spiral's iconic cover art, agreed to answer my questions. What the fuck? I sprinted around the office, frantically explaining to everyone who would listen and many who wouldn't what had just happened. The Russell Mills wants to talk with me. When I managed to calm down long enough to ask Russ some questions, my life was forever changed. It took another year to accept that I needed to take the risk and chase my dream of being an artist. For what it's worth, I consider interviewing to be a form of non-fiction performance art. In that year of self-reflection, I produced another zine, conducted interviews with former Nine Inch Nails guitarist and current stand-up comedian Aaron North, Spokane zine maker Savannah Davis, experimental ambient composer William Basinski, Voyager Golden Record producer Timothy Ferris, and Superorganism frontman Orno Noguchi. Most crucially, I had finally discovered sports anime. As someone who grew up navigating abuse and trying to shrink himself to avoid violence, the soccer anime Blue Lock's message on the power of egoism felt like a gift from God. Hajime no Ippo, the awe-inspiring story of a timid student who decides to become a professional boxer, taught me that hyperfixation can be a superpower. As a painfully awkward neurodivergent person, I am not exactly the poster child of a naturally gifted interviewer. But when it comes to caring the most and working the hardest, I will beat out everyone in the world. So there I was. Work had become more and more depressing. I went home each night, staring into space and hating myself for being a coward. I finally understood. If I didn't take that opportunity to try and make it as an artist, I might never get another chance. I had lived my life cautiously, by the book, taking the safe path, with no regard to how it made me feel. I'd finally had enough. I told my boss I was resigning, and I tried to have faith that I'd make it all work somehow. It's now been exactly 1 year since I clocked in for work. Have I made it? In financial terms, no. I have not made a single nickel since quitting my job. In creative terms, I would actually say yes. Sure, my channel is very small. I have 82 subscribers, and I honestly still have no clue what I'm doing in terms of the YouTube algorithm, thumbnail creation, community engagement, all of those things that I would actually need to gather an audience on YouTube. But if you told me a year ago that I would be able to interview Judge Dredd creator John Wagner, video game visionary Innie Austin, film critic extraordinaire Dan Murrell, I have no doubt in my mind that I would consider this year an unqualified success. Knowing that I've been able to contribute positively to the lives of my guests and the incredibly kind commenters who share their perspectives with me means more than I could possibly describe to you. It is greater than the holiest comfort food in all the land, and without a doubt more heartwarming than any other experience of my life. Has this past year solved all my problems? No. I still heavily struggle with depression, and I have a long way to go in terms of combating my horrifically negative inner monologue. But at the very least, I know that I have given absolutely everything that I can to my art. Whatever comes next, I will cherish these interviews for as long as I live.